Well, hello there, and welcome to Boomer Time. I'm your host, Nancy Cogar. I hope you're doing well, and I hope you've had a good week. I did, and it is so encouraging to hear from so many of you who are listening and watching the podcast. It's also exciting to see how much our community is growing. And as you know, I am all about helping you to become better aware and prepared for those issues that come with aging. If you've been around here for a while with me, you've heard some of the scary stuff that can happen to you, your loved ones, and even your assets if you do not have a specific, personalized, comprehensive, and enforceable plan in place. So today I thought we would share some of those so-called horror stories when it comes to legal issues involving aging. Not necessarily to scare you, but more so that you can avoid the same or similar issues as you age. So today I'm sharing the true tales from the legal crypt, and legal nightmares are definitely not a treat. So I've left out the names and the location to protect those individuals. And these are not necessarily stories that I've experienced as an attorney, although some of them may be, but some have been circulated through the legal community over time as warnings because they are just that bad, okay? We lawyers will tell you that these are the same kind of fact patterns and crazy scenarios that sometimes end up on the bar exam because they're just that unbelievable. And I've also learned in my years of practice that the truth is always stranger than fiction. And if you don't need to look far to find it, that's true too, huh? Right? So go ahead and buckle yourself in for a trip through legal horror stories. And I hope you will have a few helpful lessons from learning from the mistakes of others who have gone before you, right? I hope so. So I want to share one story before we take our first break. And this involved a personal injury case in California. It ended up becoming one of the largest monetary money judgments against a hospital in the state's history. You ready? So the plaintiff in this case was an individual who went to have some x-rays done at the hospital in question. Okay? The x-rays resulted in some significant burns thereafter in the area that had been the focus of those pictures. Well, our individual hired a lawyer, and then he filed a suit against the hospital. And then during the discovery process, they found an internal memo which was discovered and acknowledged the problem with the hospital's x-ray machine. They had notice, and they chose to do nothing about it. So the memo also stated that, unfortunately, we have this problem, but we don't have the money in the budget designated to resolve it. What? Well, maybe you can guess where this is going, okay? The author of that memo was called to testify at the jury trial, and he was asked about the memo, right? So he stated under oath that he knew about the problem, and he had written the memo, and it was his strong opinion that the hospital needed to find some money in the budget to get this fixed. You can imagine how that went over, right? And as I said, it ended up becoming one of the biggest jury verdicts and judgments against a hospital in California's history. I'm sure the hospital remembers that. We're going to have more tales from the legal crypt or the filing cabinet when we come back. Stick with us. Well, dumb criminals often lead to stupid stories. This case involved a homicide or a murder investigation where a husband was charged with murdering his wife. The evidence against him was particularly damning and made it difficult to have a defense. And here's why. He not only murdered his wife in front of his child, after he did it, he called all his friends and all his family members on his cell phone just to share what he did and how happy he was that his wife was dead. Awful. So here's the dumb part, okay? The killer husband recorded all those conversations on his cell phone. I guess he wanted to save those for the prosecutor. Ugh. I don't practice in criminal court, but I'm sure there are a lot of strange stories there. Let's do one that's closer to Boomer Time's focus on aging, estate planning, and estate administration, okay? So here's a sad story involving a last will and testament and an inheritance that was not to be. Maybe, the lesson that you're going to learn from this is the importance of being loving and kind to your elders, because relationships matter. And if not, you may find yourself missing from that will. I've seen it plenty of times. I've also seen this. So mom, in this scenario, rather than leaving her fortune to her apparently callous, unkind, and unappreciative sons, she decided to leave her dynasty to someone that she felt did love and care for her. Her dog. Yes, indeedy. Her precious 7-year-old dachshund, Winnie Pooh, got it all. And you can imagine that did not go over well with the surviving sons, and it led to a legal challenge over mom's will. The evidence included, believe it or not, guidelines from the ASPCA as to annual costs of care, including routine walks, medicines, foods, even orthopedic surgery that Winnie needed. Lifetime care was calculated at about $100,000. So a settlement was reached, but it included a big payment to Winnie Pooh's caregiver, minus all the costs of litigation. So I'm sure the boys were not too happy with that outcome. And there is a lesson to be learned. You can leave your estate to your pets, and it has to be done right with something known as a pet trust. And you can leave your inheritance to your pets, even if they're cockatiels, birds. And I've been asked to draft my share of pet trusts, both for dogs and for cats, but never a bird. I have to share this cockatiel story. It might not be scary, but it's definitely strange. So a woman left behind a well-funded trust for her 32 cockatiels that all inherited that at her death. Her stepson was charged with caring for the birds and using the money to care for them. Those kinds of birds can live for a while. This story was so bizarre that it made it to Vanity Fair magazine. So the sister of the deceased woman didn't like the bequest to the birds. The will went to benefit the 32 cockatiels, who all had their own names, a dog and a cat. Too bad, sister. We're going to take another break, and then when we come back, we will share a few more strange and scary stories from the legal crypt when we come back. Welcome back, everybody. So lawyers, they practice in all different areas, and depending on what practice area, then we tend to see the same lawyers as we end up in court and so forth, whether we spend most of our time in chancery court or probate, or over in circuit or criminal court. And some lawyers have solo practices, and others, like me, have partners with a smaller firm. I practice with 7 other partners. And there's some overlap, but most times they have different areas of practice. And there also are the big firms, the big boys. And we have a few of those here in Chattanooga, big, tall buildings and hundreds of lawyers working there. So I thought I'd share a few scary stories about the practice of law itself. Big law firms, they demand big demands on your time. Working 70 plus hours a week is not unusual, To those out there who are thinking about becoming a lawyer, take note. Late nights and early mornings are just a usual routine. So here's an anonymous story that I found from someone who was a junior partner at a big firm, so they weren't at the bottom of the leadership ladder. Well, when a bigger partner was looking for her and she wasn't at her desk at 10:30 at night, it turns out that she stepped out for just a few minutes to bring food back for a late dinner. Well, when she got back, that partner reprimanded her and said that she should have a box of cereal bars at her desk so she never had to leave. Can you believe that? Another lawyer was in document review and came down with a flesh-eating bacteria. They spent weeks in the hospital, but guess what? She kept working on that project in the hospital. Big firms are not for everyone. So here's a story of note about the importance of updating your estate planning. I talk about that all the time. Let us turn to the haunting tale of a Hollywood filmmaker named John Singleton. You may remember him. He was a director, and he directed movies like Boys in the Hood and Poetic Justice. Well, he was a celebrated director, but back in April of 2019, he slipped into a coma. And while he lay in a hospital bed, his family found out that he had never created any medical directives or powers of attorney in case of his incapacity. We've talked about that. So it was too late at that point, and it sparked a huge family battle over conservatorship. He died 13 days later in the hospital, and it got worse. So his family was horrified to find out that he had never updated his will. The will that he did have was created in 1993, and apparently, in the 26 years that had passed since he created his will, he fathered 6 more children, all with different women, and never updated his will to reflect the additions to his family. Well, this guy had a $38 million estate. So as you can imagine, there was all kinds of infighting, and it ruined relationships in the family where they went to war over their portion of the estate. Ouch, right? Lesson of having important documents in place and having someone you trust authorized to make those decisions for you, because you will never know what the day will hold, right? And remember to update beneficiaries if you get divorced. Here's why. So here's a story about David and Donna Ray, who were unhappily married. So they decided to get a divorce. 2 months after the divorce was finalized, David died in a car crash. Well, he left behind a big life insurance policy and a pension plan. And although he had 2 children from a previous marriage, he failed to designate them as the beneficiaries after the divorce was over. So they sued, saying it wasn't fair that the ex-wife was the beneficiary on those policies. But guess what? They lost. And the money went to the ex. And the children got nothing, despite suing, for their rights. So the money went to the ex, and the children were left with nothing in addition to costs for suing. So how about a few legal horror stories involving celebrities? We've often heard about celebrities and the battles that ensue after their deaths with all that money, right? The horror stories that develop from these situations should give everyone cause to update their estate plan on a fairly regular basis. Well, I want to talk about Prince. The musician Prince. He died intestate or without a will in 2016, which means that he didn't have a will or a trust, of course, to administer his assets, and he had a lot of them. We talked about this before too, right? So this left a huge estate in probate court, which was totally reliant on the statutory intestacy laws in Minnesota. That's where he was from. So they had to go with what the law provided because Prince didn't provide any instructions in a document that would be recognized as a will. Well, guess what? He also didn't have any tax planning. And Minnesota is one of those states that has a lot of taxes that apparently come with the states. Not like Tennessee here, we don't have an inheritance tax. So, as you might suspect, many people came forward to claim that the estate of Prince, that they were an heir or he owed them money and they were a creditor. It caused long, long delays. His case was open for 6 years in court, pending there with legal bills and exposure to creditors. It finally closed recently, which included a distribution of $156 million in assets that he left behind. Could have been so much easier if he had put a plan in place, and it probably would have been a lot more money too if he had done some tax planning. Larry King, remember him? That might be someone you haven't thought about in a while. He died back in 2021, a couple of years ago. So 2 years prior to his death, he wrote a note that he wanted his estate divided between his children. Well, guess what? A battle ensued between him and his wife, who he was divorcing, and his children. This horror story just ended up developing between the surviving spouse and the stepchildren. And it was all because estate planning was not done properly. It led to years and years of costs and litigation. Finally, let's talk about Marilyn Monroe. So this is a horror story, not about estate planning, but more about tax planning, which needs to be part of a large estate. Her probate took an overwhelming 39 years to complete. Can you believe that? And half of her estate went to the IRS. So it was about $30 million. Overall, the lesson here is to put the right planning in place and do it the right way with a professional who understands the importance of specific, comprehensive, personalized estate planning that is specific to your needs and your desires. Please do not do it yourself. There are too many risks, and more often than not, that leads to more legal bills, sometimes just trying to sort out your intent in what you were trying to do in those do-it-yourself documents. Or otherwise, there's someone that's challenging it that's not happy about what you left and says it's not a will. I've been there for that too. So, we've talked about this, but I just wanted to remind you that estate planning is not just about a will. It also includes powers of attorney for both healthcare and personal affairs. And those should be durable, right? You should also have end-of-life care documents. And you want to have a conversation about other estate planning documents that may help you avoid complexities, court, and even litigation. So your choices really matter. And I just wanted to reinforce that after we talked about all these horror stories from the legal crypts. So think about that very carefully and think about who you want to choose to be in charge about making these decisions related to your care and your assets. Estate planning is also, in my opinion, not a one and done event. My clients call me when there's a significant event in their lives, good or bad. that's when we need to talk about how that may impact the estate plan. So this has been, you know, a fun show for me. I like to share good stories, and I think some of them had good information in them too. I have tons of resources on my website, which is nancycogar.com. You've been there before, I hope. If not, go and check it out. If you're looking for something specific, there are lots of things to review there. And it also has all my podcasts on there. So if you're looking for something else and you don't see it there, reach out and let us know. You can also subscribe to my monthly newsletter, Elder Law News You Can Use. I get lots of good feedback on that, and there's lots of good information in there. And you won't find those stories, I'm telling you, elsewhere. That's all complimentary, as is this podcast. So I hope you're learning, and I hope you like the podcast, Boomer Time. I'm having a great time, and I enjoy sharing this information. So remember to like and share it with a friend. So you can find us on my website, YouTube, and also Spotify, Facebook, and even Instagram. I wanted to end today with a word of encouragement. I've been thinking about some of the things that caregivers go through, and I've had a couple instances recently where I've just had people going through a real tough time, especially if it involves a medical issue or they're hospitalized, trying to find, a transition care. These are not easy things. So, if you find yourself in the midst of trying to find care for an adult parent, it's just plain old stressful. So are family conflicts over estates. I've seen too many of those. So all these things are complex, and they can bring stress, conflict, ruin relationships. It's just planning can help to avoid some of those things. You may not be able to control the behavior of a family member or control their tone or reaction to something, but you can, and I just wanted to remind you of this, you can limit your exposure. You can put better boundaries in place, and you can control your own reaction to that type of behavior. I just wanted to emphasize today that it will not help to add to that kind of tirade. Let's remember that, caring for a declining adult is really the focus, keeping them safe, keeping them comfortable. And if they've passed, honoring their wishes that they've left behind, right? So if you're struggling with a loved one or a family member, we've all been there. Remember these things, okay? Listen first. And if possible, you don't need to have them dump on you unnecessarily. That's a choice, right? But if there is necessary communication needed, learn the importance of listening and wait. Be patient to respond. Slow to anger, right? I really believe that a gentle response will often deflect anger, and even harsh words will add to that circumstance that doesn't seem to be getting any better. So as long as there is no danger involved, and I qualify it with that in the circumstance, I just wanted to remind you to turn it over to God, because remember, He cares for you. I care about you, and I care about the Boomer Time community. And I've said it before and I'll say it again, this is why I'm here doing this, because I want you to be better prepared. I want you to avoid some of these things that I'm seeing happening to people who have not planned. So that wraps us up for today on Boomer Time. Remember, like I said, you can reach out and you can get all kinds of resources and stay connected with us. And I would love for you to do that. And reach out. Maybe your question will lead to a whole new episode. I want to hear from you. So have a great week, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.